the beginning of Act 2, we see these kind of parallel relationships between parents and children in the play. So there is a lot of spying from parents on their children, on their adult children, no less, in the beginning of this play. Act 2, Scene 1, and the beginning of Scene 2 are all about parents manipulating and conniving the wills of their kids. So in 2-1, we see Polonius send his messenger Ronaldo to spy on Laertes, to meet up with people who are Danish in France and to say, hey, I've heard all this horrible stuff about Laertes. He drinks, he gambles, he hangs out with prostitutes, to see what people say. If people are like, oh, Laertes, like, no way, he's always studying in the library. Or if they say, oh, yeah, Laertes, let me tell you, he's like the worst person in the world. And Polonius does this to learn about his son. Polonius is also heavily invested in the life of Ophelia. Prior to the events of Act 2, he has commanded her not to see Hamlet, and he makes a plan soon to use her, which we'll talk about briefly. Polonius also in 2-2 spends time trying to spy on Hamlet, trying to get truth out of Hamlet. Polonius and Claudius make a plan to spy on Hamlet using Ophelia at the end of the first part of Act 2, Scene 2. Claudius and Gertrude are spying on Hamlet via Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who they enlist to get information about Hamlet. And kind of in the beyond section of this too, Uncle Norway, Fortinbras's uncle, is also involved in a plot to spy on his adult nephew. So lots and lots of machinations. And I think what Shakespeare wants you to see in the kind of first couple scenes of Act 2 is there's a lot of manipulation in this play. There's a lot of people who are pretending to be one way and they actually are another. There is a network of lies and deception that undergirds how Denmark works. And Hamlet seems to be the only person who is authentic, honest, and real in the midst of this space. If you're going to be authentic and real in a space that is manipulative and deceitful, you're going to be an oddball. You're going to be a weirdo. And Hamlet's antic disposition throughout the couple interactions that he has with people in Act 2, Scene 2, is indicative of his trying to cope with this dichotomy between honesty and deception that's at the crux of this part in the play. So a quick word on Ophelia. We'll spend a lot more time talking about Ophelia as the play continues, but it's worth noting that so far, she has very little agency in this story. As we mentioned already, in her last conversation with Polonius, she is basically commanded not to spend time with the person that she loves, seems to have a clear love for Hamlet, and this seems to be very painful to her, that she's just commanded more like a servant than a child to, as she says, obey my lord. Ophelia is... She just doesn't have any freedom here. And you can imagine how difficult it would be. I don't know, maybe you have some experience with dating people that your parents are not in favor of, but you can imagine how difficult it would be if your parents just straight up commanded you not to be in touch with someone that you had genuine feelings for. Into that space, then, Hamlet is, he shows up in her room, all messy and crazy in the beginning of Act 2. We can consider Hamlet, knowing that he's a prince, someone who was likely dressed regally and royally and carefully. He bursts into Ophelia's room at an odd hour of the night with his shirt untucked and his hair all a mess and his stockings down and all this kind of crazy stuff that just seems wild and uncharacteristic. And Ophelia is freaked out. She goes and talks to Polonius. Polonius says he's mad for thy love. He's mad that you are rejecting his advances. There's probably some more going on in that. I wonder if maybe Hamlet has a real moment where, he's just seen the ghost of his dead father and he goes and talks to his girlfriend. Maybe he wants to tell her more and feels that he can't, either because he'll be betraying the ghost or betraying himself. I'm not entirely sure. But one way or the other, Ophelia here is... she is made to react by all these more powerful people in the play. Laertes impresses his advice on her. Polonius commands her. Hamlet forces her to deal with his craziness. And Ophelia is passive and reactionary at this point in the play. Her father takes love letters that Hamlet has written to her and pulls them out to read in front of the king, which is... I mean, again, imagine, make this into a 21st century example. If your parents were very offended by you being interested in someone who you're interested in, and then they take your text messages with that person and bring them to the principal's office and read them with you present with the principal to convince the principal that you shouldn't be with the person that you want to be with. But it gets a little worse because Polonius now is about to take Ophelia and force her to go talk to Hamlet while Claudius and Polonius hide behind a curtain, which basically means Ophelia is going to be used to spy on Hamlet. She's going to be used to spy on the person that she loves, which is manipulative and painful and difficult and in many, many ways unjust, but also indicative of Ophelia's role in the play thus far. Okay, so moving into Act 2 itself. We can't talk about all these things, but one thing that clearly comes out of Act 2, Scene 2 is Hamlet's discernment. So he's able to sniff out really 3 rats, but kind of, I guess, 2 sets of rats in Act 2, Scene 2. And the first is Polonius. Polonius goes and talks to him with the intent of trying to figure out if he's crazy or not. And Hamlet seems to know this. And so Hamlet says, you're a fishmonger, and he makes bawdy comments about his daughter, and he does this to offend Polonius. Polonius says, "What are you reading?" And Hamlet says, "Words." And Hamlet says, "I'll tell you what I'm reading. I'm reading that old men have gray beards and are wrinkled in the face and have weak hams," and all these things that are just meant to mock Polonius. One of the things that Hamlet here is poking at is the dishonesty of Polonius. He says, "I wish you were a fishmonger. I wish you were so honest a man." And then later says, "To be honest is to be one picked out of 10,000. He says, nobody is being honest. Polonius, you're not coming to talk to me because you're worried about me. How are you doing after the death of your father? That's not what you're interested in. You're just spying on me so that you can go back and tell Claudius and Gertrude how I am." And Hamlet sees through it and he plays off it. He doesn't give himself away, and he succeeds in making Polonius look foolish. Then when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come up, initially Hamlet is very happy to see them, but he's confused why they're there. They're childhood friends. They've been friends for a while. Maybe you have some friends like this. I think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are good for a laugh. I think they're pretty superficial. They stay kind of up at the surface level. And maybe you've had relationships that you've tried to push a little bit further. Someone has said, like, what's wrong? And you've actually been like, all right, you want to know what's wrong? Like, here's what's wrong. And you drop some like real truth on somebody, or you really like explain what's going on with you. And then you realize these people are not capable of going to that depth with me. Like they will only stay up at the top. And so Hamlet, perhaps expecting to be joked with or laughed at with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, drops some real heavy truth on them. And all they're doing is looking for the punchline. All they're doing is looking for the joke that they can send, the meme, the gif, the gif. I don't know. So this is the truth that Hamlet drops on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And this is one of the most beautiful passages in Hamlet. What's important here is that Hamlet is showing us a difference between what he knows to be true of the world and his perception of the world because of the personal tragedy that he's experiencing. If you were to look through this part, you'd see the blue here is all the good stuff that Hamlet's saying. And there's just a little red. There's much more blue than red. And certainly in the next bit, when he talks about his view of people, there's much more positive than negative. Hamlet says, I don't really know what's going on, but I've lost all my mirth. Mirth means joy or delight. He says, my disposition is so tampered with right now that all the good stuff that I know to be true of the earth, and he talks about the excellent canopy of the air, majestical roof, right? The atmosphere fretted with golden fire, the fire of the sun. He says, to me, it's a sterile promontory. Sterile means you could like a sterile room, right? Is just like it's medicinally clean. There's nothing growing. There's no life. Sterile also can connect to barrenness or to like a desert, a lack of life. Promontory is a cliff. So he says this beautiful thing that's filled with greenery and birds singing and all this stuff. To me, it's just like a crag out in the middle of the wilderness, out in the middle of the desert. This beautiful atmosphere fretted with golden fire, he says, it's a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. All the good things that he knows are not enough to dissuade him from the bad things that he feels. And thinking about human beings, he says, man, think about humans. What is better in the world than a human? He talks about their reason, their the inform and moving, have express and admirable. Watch the Olympics. Watch what people can do. Watch a beautiful dance and a dancer who does expressive and admirable things with their physicality. Watch people in action like angelic beings. What more would you compare it to? It doesn't make sense to compare. You're going to compare the movement of a human being to a deer or a dog, right? He says, in apprehension, like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon, the apex, the height of the animals. What is more perfect in the world, he suggests, than a human being? And yet, to me, he says, what is this quintessence of dust? The epitome of dust. At its base core, he says, it's dust. Man delights not me. Struggling, Hamlet is. I don't know, a little bit of Yoda there. Hamlet is struggling here with two conflicting realities. On the one hand, a truth that he understands about the world, that it's beautiful, it's wonderful, about people, that they're beautiful, and that they're wonderful, that they're amazing. There's nothing like human beings in the world. And yet, Hamlet says, to me, and we could maybe add right now, because of the death of my father, because of the things that I'm experiencing at this existential level, all I see is dust. Hamlet says, I walk out into the atmosphere and it's a beautiful, fine day and the sun is shining and the birds are singing and I smell a congregation of vapors. I walk alongside people in the hallways. I know that they are wonderful. I know that human beings are amazing. And yet to me, I just see dust. I just see walking death and mortality. And there's no delight in it. There's nothing in it that's good. This seems to be contrary to how Hamlet probably is. And in Act 2, Scene 2 as well, we see some real joy from Hamlet. We do see some real mirth. Watch how he greets his friends and the joy and the compassion and the hospitality with which he greets people. Watch how he greets these actors who come into the palace, these actors who are working class people. And here's this prince and he welcomes them profusely. And he says to Polonius, treat them amazingly. And this seems to be how Hamlet probably perceived the world prior to these events. If we had met Hamlet 3 months ago before his father died, we'd probably think, here's a really mirthful man. Here's a guy who really sees the world in a beautiful way, who really delights in things and delights in good things. In this speech from the Aeneid, he can't help himself. He gets up and he performs like half of the monologue. He just gets caught up in the spirit and in the emotion that's presented to him. And that magnanimity of soul is a compelling aspect of who he is as a character. But he's going through some real hard stuff right now. And because his father is dead and because his father was murdered and because he's being asked to kill Claudius as a result, Hamlet is divided from himself. He's distracted from his vision of the world. What he knows to be true is in direct conflict with what he feels. And what he feels is this tremendous sense of isolation that is mirthless. And so he knows how to go through the motions still. But when he's alone in a little bit, when everybody leaves and it's just him, and he says, now I'm alone, and entering into his second soliloquy, we'll see this resentment, this bitterness, this pain, this anguish, this difficulty, and a real doubt that is making it very difficult for him to figure out what he's supposed to do. How are you supposed to act? How's he supposed to act when so many of these things are hitting him at the exact same time? That's one of the big questions that we see as we look at Hamlet bouncing around with all these different people in his society.